Okay. Hey. So, the sine of theta is 8 over 7. So, on the front of your sheet, the sine of theta is equal to what? Y over r. So, I have 8 over 17. And so then I have the tangent of theta. And what's tangent? Y over x. So y over x is less than 0. But y over r is always positive. So that means my y has to be positive here. So if this is positive, but this is negative, what does that tell me is for sure? What has to be negative? The y is positive. The y is positive. It has to be positive. Okay, it's got to be 1 or 2, right? But the tangent is negative. So if y is positive, what has to be true about x? It's negative, so which quadrant does that put me in? The second, right? So if I'm going to draw and I don't know my x. So for Pythagorean theorem, I get 8 squared plus x squared equals 17 squared. So my x squared, so 17 squared minus 8 squared is 225. So I'm going to take the square root on both sides. And when I take the square root, I can get a positive answer or a negative answer. Well, what did we say was true about the x? It was negative. I don't know why my board is writing weird. So the x is negative 15. So that means the x is negative 15. The y is 8. And the r is 17. So the cosine, so x over r will be negative 15 over 17. The tangent is y over x. So that's going to give me 8 over negative 15. The cosecant is the inverse of which one? The sine, right? So that becomes 17 over 8. The secant is the inverse of the cosine. So I get negative 17 over 15. And the cotangent is the inverse of the tangent. So I get negative 15 over 8. It doesn't matter whether the negative goes top or bottom. Okay, so the next one, I have the cotangent of theta equals negative 4. Well, what does the cotangent equal? That. Over y, and the cotangent of theta I know it's 4 over 1, and I know it's negative. So either the x is negative or the y is negative. And I don't know which one, because like what happened on the last problem, I don't know which one it is. Okay? So the next one, I have secant of theta. And what's the secant of the theta? It's r over x, and it's greater than 0. The r is always positive, so what does that mean about the x? It has to be positive, right? So where does the negative go over here? If the x is positive, the 1 has to be negative, correct? When I draw this, I have a positive x and a negative y. So which quadrant do I have to be in? 4. So I'm going to go 4. There. So now I get squared plus negative 1 squared equals squared. So 4 squared is 16 plus 1 is 17. So I have 17 equals r squared. So when I take the square root, r is the square root of 17. R is the square root of 17, x is 4, and y is negative 1. So the sign is going to be y over r. So I get negative 1 over the square root of 17. Can I have the square root of 17 on the bottom? So I'm going to have to rationalize that. So I get negative square root of 17 over 17. Sorry about the board, y'all. So the cosine is x over r. So my x is 4. And I have to rationalize again. The tangent is going to be y over x. Secant is the inverse of the sine. Do I want to flip this one? Because then that puts the square root of 17 on the bottom. Which one do I want to flip? This one right here. So I get a negative square root of 17. And the secant is the inverse of the cosine. And again, I'm going to flip the first one so we don't have to re-rationalize it. So I get square root of 17 over 4. Okay, so last problem. So cosecant. What does cosecant equal? R over y. So it's r over y and it's negative. So I don't know if the negative goes on top or on bottom. But my cosine of theta, and the cosine of theta is x over r, it has to be less than 0. So I have r over y, and so what do I know about r? It has to be positive. So where does the negative have to go? So the 2 is negative. And if I know this is positive, what does that tell me about the x? What does it have to be? Negative, right? So if the x is negative and the y is negative, which quadrant am I in? Third. So the y is negative 2. I don't know the x. And the r is the square root of 5. So I'm going to get negative 2 squared plus x squared equals the square root of 5 squared. So I have 4 plus x squared. So the square root of 5 squared, what does that equal? 5. So if I subtract the 4, I have x squared equals 1. What did we decide x had to be? Negative. Is that short?